Hi, in this tutorial, you'll learn how to precisely position and orient a panorama in a 3D model. The alignment of panoramas inside 3D models will facilitate smooth transitions when going from a model node to a panorama node, and also when transitioning between panorama nodes that have been aligned with the same 3D model. We'll start with a project that has a 3D model of a villa and a bunch of exterior panoramas of that villa. But first, let me show you what we want to achieve with this tutorial. Looking at the output, you can see that the project opens showing the 3D model with point hotspots placed in the model representing the panoramas. And when we click one of those hotspots, we go into the panorama with a smooth transition. Also, when we now move around between panoramas, either by clicking hotspots or thumbnails from the menu, the transition will be smooth using the 3D model geometry to move and distort the panoramas. To make this possible, we need to align the panoramas inside the 3D model so that Pano2VR knows their precise position and orientation. Pano2VR uses a concept called camera points to, among other things, represent a panorama camera position inside a 3D model. So let's start in the 3D model node and switch the viewer to camera points mode. And since we have an understanding of the scene and know where each panorama was taken, we can start by dragging panorama nodes from the Tor browser and dropping them roughly at the correct position. I'll start with the poolside lounge panorama. And after placing it in the model, I just need to drag it up a little to a realistic camera height. Now that the camera point is in a good position, we can move on to the next step, which is finding certain features that are both visible in the 3D model and the panorama. To do this, we add control points, which help Pano2VR automatically find the precise camera position. To add them, start by clicking Move to Camera Point. This moves the viewer to the location of the camera point we just created, and here we can start adding control points. We're already in a position inside a 3D model that's very similar to the poolside lounge panorama, which should make it easy to find and identify features that we can mark with control points. And notice that the Move to Camera Point button also switched the viewer into control points mode, so we can immediately start identifying and placing control points. The first control point I'll add will be here at the corner of this arch. And this creates a new control point for the project and adds it to the control points table. The second column of the table shows the number of instances a control point has throughout the project, since any control point can potentially be found in a number of panoramas or models. Right now, since we just created this control point, the number is 1, meaning it only exists in the current node, which is our 3D model. To make it easier to identify a control point later, I can assign it a symbol and even give it a description like arch left. I'll continue adding control points to distinct features that should also be easy to find and identify in the panoramas. Pano2VR doesn't require a lot of control points, but you should make it a habit of spreading them out across the entire area, which makes it easier for Pano2VR to pinpoint the exact camera position. And now that I've placed a sufficient number of control points, the next thing I have to do is find and position those same points in the panorama I'm trying to align. To switch to the poolside lounge panorama, I'll click Switch to this node. And now I have the panorama in the viewer, and the 3D model is shown in the control points viewer here, and it's showing me the control points of that node that I just added in a table called unlinked. And unlinked just means that they haven't yet been positioned in the current node. So let's start doing this, and I'm going to start at the top of the list with the control point that I gave a symbol and a description to. And notice that you'll see the description in the tooltip. When I activate the control point, the control points viewer will show me the exact position of that control point in the 3D model. So now I can easily find that point and place an instance of it in the current panorama. And notice that when I do this, the control point disappears from the list of unlinked control points and moves over to the list labeled current node. The number 2 in the second column tells us that this control point now has instances in 2 nodes of our project, the 3D model and the poolside lounge panorama. Also, the next control point in the unlinked table gets activated and the control point's viewer shows me its position. And with that, I can quickly continue placing instances of all unlinked control points in the current panorama. And now Pano2VR can use that information and put the camera point at exactly the correct position and orientation. And I can trigger this by clicking the button up here in the Properties panel called Align Camera Point. When alignment is done, the third column in the control points table shows me the results of the alignment, with numbers being the deviation in degrees for each control point. And with all the numbers being close to 0, this is a very good result, and it shows me that the automatic alignment worked. So now with this first panorama positioned correctly inside the 3D model, we can rebuild the output to see the smooth transition when going from the model view to the panorama view. But first, I'll go to the output properties and turn on model transitions to enable transitions that use the 3D model geometry. Now I'll rebuild the output and check the result. And that's looking good. All we have to do now is repeat the same procedure for all the panoramas in the tour to enable smooth transitions between model and panoramas, and also between the panorama nodes. So I'll go back to the 3D model, switch to camera points mode, and go back to the default view, and drag the next panorama into the model. Again, I move the camera to the camera point that I just created. And since this panorama was taken from a very similar position as the first one, we can reuse the control points we created for the first panorama because those features are also visible here. But I want to take this opportunity to show you what happens if you accidentally misplace a control point and how we can deal with this. So again, I'll switch to the panorama node to place control points. And starting from the top of the unlinked list, I'll work my way down. But this time, I'll place the second control point in the wrong position. Okay, now I'm done and I'll click Align Camera Point. And looking at the results in the third column, I can see that something is off. The control points have way higher numbers than before, indicating a larger deviation from an ideal position. And by the way, if you have a larger number of control points, you can click this icon in the third column and it'll sort the table and put the worst control points at the top. Clicking and activating the topmost control point, I can now compare the control points viewer with the main viewer and correct my mistake by hitting delete or backspace to remove the control point in the current panorama, or I can simply drag it to the correct position. Aligning the camera point again, things should go back to normal, where all control points show a result close to 0, meaning the position is very likely correct. After aligning multiple panoramas to the same 3D model, not only do we get a smooth camera transition when moving from the model node to a panorama node, but also when moving between those panorama nodes either by clicking hotspots or by clicking a thumbnail in the menu. Finally, let's recap what we've learned so far about control points in Pano2VR, and I also want to give you a few final housekeeping and productivity tips when it comes to working with control points. So a control point marks a certain feature within our tour, let's say a corner of a door, and it's defined once, but to be useful, we'll have instances in multiple panoramas and 3D models within the project, like every node that shows that same door. Here in the control points properties, you can choose what control points you want to work with and the position in the current node. So you could pick a panorama that has a similar view and also shows the same features as the current panorama. Or you can pick the 3D model. The table labeled unlinked shows you control points that have instances in the chosen node but haven't yet been placed in the current node. When you click and activate a control point, the control points viewer will show you its location. If you quickly want to find a particular control point in the current node, double-click it in the table. So if a certain feature isn't visible in the current panorama, you can mark that control point to be ignored by holding the Alt or Option key and double-clicking anywhere in the panorama. And this will remove that control point from the unlinked table and add a gray entry to the current node table. So this can help you keep the unlinked table clean and only have control points that are actually visible in the current node. I already mentioned that you can delete an instance of a control point in the current node by activating it and hitting delete or backspace. But if you want to delete a control point from the entire tour because maybe a certain feature wasn't a good choice to be used as a control point, you can right-click it and choose Remove Control Point from Project. Once you think you've placed sufficient control points in the current node, you can trigger the automatic alignment by clicking this button up here, as I showed you before. But automatic alignment can also be triggered when you're in camera points mode. So as you can see, camera points that are already correctly aligned are locked, and that's to prevent you from accidentally moving them around. The tooltip will tell you that a camera point is locked, as does the checkbox in the Properties panel. So if I just unlock that camera point and move it, I can also align the camera point here. And the camera point snapped back to the correct position. And while we're here, you probably noticed this button called Align All Camera Points. This one will come in handy if you have corrected the position of a certain control point that's used in multiple panoramas, and you want to make sure that the automatic positioning of all the corresponding camera points gets updated using the new position of that control point. So watch closely. When I click Align All Camera Points, some of the camera points down by the pool will snap into position. And this sums up working with control points in Pano2VR. So now that we have smooth transitions when moving between panoramas and 3D models in a tour, the next video is going to show you more features in camera points mode that allows us to create more sophisticated camera paths when moving between nodes and taking those transitions to the next level. Until then, thanks for watching.